Good morning. It is Monday, the 26th of January. I'm Maeve McMahon, and this is Europe Today, your daily dose of European news and analysis live here on Euronews. Coming up today, all eyes are on the EU-India summit taking place this week in New Delhi. After months of preparation and a decade of talks, the summit aims to finalise the details of an EU-India free trade agreement, one that would liberalise billions of euros in trade, cutting tariffs on European cars and wine while expanding market access for Indian electronics, textiles and chemicals. Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, Council President Antonio Costa and Trade Commissioner Maros Sefcovic spent the weekend on a plane to India, and our Euronews' EU editor Maria Tadeo was also on board and sent us this dispatch from New Delhi.
Good morning, Europe Today. Indeed, on the road as we're in New Delhi, the European Union and India are standing on the cusp of signing a new trade agreement. The head of the Commission calls this, quote, the mother of all deals. And that's because if this deal does go ahead, it will open up a market of more than 1.4 billion people for European companies. The talks, as I mentioned, are still ongoing. And today, the head of the Commission, accompanied by the president of the European Council, Antonio Costa, will participate in a military parade as the guests of honor. And then tomorrow, it's time for the EU-India summit. That's when the deal could, if everything goes well, come to fruition. Of course, the number of red lines are very well documented and reported for the Indian authorities. They do not want to open up their agricultural market. That also involves, of course, products like dairy and grain. They believe their local manufacturers and their local producers should come before. But when European sources that we consulted suggested that overall that is not a problem for them because the overall benefits for the car makers, the chemical sector, the producers of olive oil, wine and spirits, the exporters of services here in India will greatly benefit from this agreement. As I mentioned, the talks continue. And yesterday night, we spoke with the man who is really in charge of the negotiations. And that is, of course, the Trade Commissioner, Maros Sefcovic, who told us he really believes this time will be the right time. So European Union is very close to getting it done. How close is it?
We just had a very good meeting with Minister Goyal. I think it's our 11th meeting over the last 10 months, so we spent an enormous amount of time together to get it done. So we are checking, the latest documents. We are exchanging the last numbers, and I believe that we are very, very close.
So come Tuesday, there will be a signature.
I mean, we do our utmost, and I believe we will have a signature.
You've said the Indians have been tough negotiators. Why?
I think they are known for being very tough negotiators, and also our starting positions been very different. They had a high tariff, they are a developing country, and we wanted to respect the specificity and at the same time to protect European general interest.
And of course, is there anything that's a red line for them that we cannot accept and vice versa? What's the sticking point at this hour?
I think that we had a very frank and open discussion at the beginning of the last year where we decided to keep the most sensitive sectors for both of us outside of this deal so we can really focus on the positive outcome. So we are working on that right now. And of course, always in the last hour. So you want to check the numbers. You want to be sure that we are both delivering. And therefore, we had a meeting this afternoon. The teams will work on it. And I believe that tomorrow we will complete the whole exercise.
This is the mother of all trade deals. It's something the Commission loves to say. But for Europeans who are watching Euronews today and they go, what does that mean? How is that going to impact European businesses and sectors? Where is the benefit, the value of this deal going to come from?
First and foremost, this is the largest trade deal ever. If you look at it from the point of view of the number of consumers, we are talking about almost 2 billion people. Then we are looking also at the level of tariffs. So, I mean, what is very important to recall is that in some sector, India has tariff going up to 150%. And therefore, big parts of the economy, the whole sector has been completely closed off to the European exporters. And now we are kind of reopening. So the big benefit would be opening of the economy. Second, building up the integrated global supply chains and hedging against global instability.
Is there any particular sector that you say this is a good deal for you?
Yeah. I believe that we will have that good message because this is really opening a new perspective for many sectors. And I believe that we are truly opening a new chapter in strategic India-EU relations.
Indians were hit heavily by the Trump tariffs to the European Union too. It's a different deal, but nonetheless, there's a pressure of tariffs coming from the United States. Why the timing? Why sign it now?
I think it's a high time. I mean, it was more than 10 years in the making. And I think that momentum which was built when we've been here in February, the whole College of Commissioners and Prime Minister Modi and Ursula von der Leyen took the political decision. Let's do our best. Let's try to have the best outcome. And it would help us to kind of have this insurance against the global trade turmoil. And therefore, now I think it's a highest time to do it. And I believe that it will help both sides and our economic operators.
EU Commissioner Maros Šefčovič there speaking to our Maria Tadeo from the Indian capital, New Delhi. And another issue where the EU and India hope to work together is ending the war in Ukraine, although Brussels remains wary of Modi's ties to Vladimir Putin. As fighting rages, 2 days of talks on Ukraine have come to an end in Abu Dhabi. For more on these talks, we can turn now to our Ukraine correspondent, Sasha Vakalina. Good morning, Sasha. So, President Zelensky has called these talks in Abu Dhabi constructive. What does that exactly mean?
In fact, all the sides described those talks as constructive. But I think it's fair to say that the most constructive thing about it is the fact that the talks actually did take place. And this is, of course, coming from the initiative of the US administration. It was the US envoys that managed to convince the Russians to actually, for the first time, sit down with the Ukrainian delegation and negotiators there at the same table in this trilateral format. There is no breakthrough yet, but this was a very significant first step. Following the talks, President Zelensky also said that the US security guarantees for Ukraine are 100% ready. He also mentioned that the EU membership would be an economic guarantee for Ukraine, once again reiterating the importance of EU membership for Ukraine, of course. Now, the sticking point remained the same, and all the sides admit that this is Ukraine's territory. Zelensky once again said that Ukraine is not going to cede any territory and wants everybody to respect its territorial integrity, while Moscow negotiators said that they do indeed once again repeated they do want Ukraine to withdraw its troops even from the territories that Russia never controlled, Maeve.
OK, but still that same sticking point, of course. Sasha Vakalina, thank you so much for that live update. So with no real end in sight to the war in Ukraine, we've seen more and more Europeans actually calling for the EU to take full control of its own security. In an interview with Euronews, the Spanish Foreign Minister, José Manuel Álvarez, said Brussels must move towards creating a European army. But what exactly would that mean in practice? Jakub Janis takes a look.
It is a very small ask, said Donald Trump about his desire to buy Greenland, calling it just
big, beautiful piece of ice.
He reportedly raged when Europe sent troops there. But let's be honest, sending around 40 soldiers from 8 nations was more about sending a message than sending actual power. But what if we assembled a European army? Well, the reality is, we probably won't. But the EU is forging something else. If you combine all European countries, we actually have 1.5 million active duty soldiers. And that sounds huge, but it is a logistical nightmare. While the US military operates with 32 weapon systems, we have 172. That means mismatched spare parts, manuals, and ammunition that simply don't work together. And moving a tank from Lisbon to Warsaw can currently take months of paperwork. That is why the EU is rushing to fix the so-called military Schengen. The new goal is to cut that travel permission time down to just 3 days in peacetime and only 6 hours in an emergency. So the goal isn't a single super army, but making our 27 existing armies actually compatible. But fixing the system is the easy part. Finding the soldiers is harder. While Latvia and Croatia are bringing back the draft, the question remains, is the wider European public ready to fight? So that's why we aren't replacing NATO. We are just ensuring that if the phone rings at 3 a.m., we can actually pick it up.
Jakub Janis there. And now coming up, we'll be joined by Thomas Byrne, the Irish Minister of State for European Affairs and Defence. Affiliated with the centre-right Fianna Fáil party, a solicitor by trade, Minister Byrne has served in a number of roles within government and is currently preparing Ireland for the EU presidency this July. Good morning, Minister.
Morning, Maeve.
Good to have you with us here.
Thanks very much.
So look, let's just talk first about those US-led talks on Ukraine to end the war. Do you have any faith in these talks?
Well, I have faith in the process and we're very grateful that the US is doing this, but nothing's going to happen really until Russia stops. what it's doing. And that's what has to happen. All through these peace talks, we see Russia bombing homes, maternity hospital, causing all sorts of destruction in Ukraine. And I think when that ends, then all the preparations that we're doing, whether it's in those talks in the Middle East or indeed work at the European Commission and the Council last week on a prosperity plan for Ukraine, well, all that can come to fruition if Russia stops and if we can get agreement at these peace talks.
And do you think this week in India the Europeans could put some pressure on Modi there, use perhaps some soft power and diplomacy to put pressure on him, to put pressure on of course, Vladimir Putin to end the war?
Well, I've no doubt that Ukraine will be part of the discussions this week in India. I think the work that the Commission is doing in India is very, very important. I think it's absolutely essential for Europe and indeed for Ireland as well. Britain has had a trade deal recently with India, and it certainly puts some of their goods at a competitive advantage compared to, say, some Irish goods. And I think it's very, very important that we can put in place a trade agreement with India as well. Diversification is very important. It's very important that we open up as many markets as possible. And we do that, with the Commission does that on all our behalf. So I think it's very, very welcome.
So Ireland would support the EU-India trade deal? Because you didn't support the EU-Mercosur.
Obviously, we'd have to look at the details of it. But in principle, Ireland is very much in favour of trade diversification and opening up as many markets as possible. We've benefited hugely from international trade over the years, and we want that to continue, and we want that to change and diversify.
Let's go back to Ukraine. Of course, that came up last week in that EU summit. And President Zelensky in Davos was very, very critical, Minister, of the European leaders. Did he go a step too far, do you think?
No, I'm not going to criticise President Zelensky. I think he was quite strong in his words. I think it is a fact that there's been a lot of support from the European Union, European countries, including Ireland, for Ukraine, and that will continue. I think what's happening in Ukraine at the moment is pretty unparalleled. It's unconscionable. It shouldn't be happening. His people are suffering a huge amount, so I have a huge amount of understanding for him. But I think our role now is to do as much as possible to bring this to an end. We must continue to put economic pressure on Russia.
He piled on the pressure. He said Europe's not doing enough. It wouldn't be able to defend itself.
Well,
does he have a point?
Well, certainly before Christmas we would have been in favour of seizing the assets, the frozen assets here in Europe. We weren't able to achieve that, but we certainly have achieved a very significant loan for Ukraine from that European Council. But we could have done more.
And how did European leaders feel last Thursday about that criticism from, I know you don't want to make a point on it, but what was the mood in the room last Thursday?
I don't think it was a big feature of the discussion in terms of his comments, but I think certainly people want to see this war come to an end because they realise that it is an economic and security threat to Europe and to all of us.
And what about EU membership for Ukraine? Is it possible by 2027, do you think?
Well, look, it's extremely ambitious, but if that's part of the peace deal, we'll certainly have to make it work. Let's see what happens, and certainly it would be a big job for the Irish presidency, which starts in July, to make that happen. We have put enlargement down as one of our top priorities. We see a huge opportunity to finish negotiations with Montenegro, to really progress Albania, and to have Ukraine and Moldova into the realm as well of European membership. I'm not giving a date, but if the peace talks demand an earlier date, then the European Union will have to work towards that.
What about the Board of Peace, President Trump's Board of Peace? Could that possibly replace the UN? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, look, I don't think anybody wants it to replace the UN. I think that was the unanimous consideration of the leaders last week. It's certainly our view in Ireland. We greatly value the UN in all its facets and despite all its problems. So we don't see any organisation replacing the UN. And I think that's generally the view all around the place.
And just finally, a brief word on Mercosur. How do you feel having rejected it? I mean, there's been a lot of criticism here among senior MEPs.
Look, we weren't able to get political consensus for it, notwithstanding the very significant benefits to Ireland of Mercosur, which will happen if it's implemented. The government simply wasn't satisfied with the situation for farmers, and that's been a political reality in Ireland and in France.
Minister Thomas Byrne, thank you so much for coming into us here in the studio, and thank you so much for tuning in. For more on any of the stories we've been discussing, do visit euronews.com. But that brings this edition of Europe Today to an end. We'll be back tomorrow. We'll be in New Delhi. We'll be bringing you pictures of the European Commission President in a traditional Indian sari. See you then.
Decision-making is crucial in businesses.
The cloud spending will surpass the $1 trillion mark in Europe.
You have to love the problem.
Making equity great again